coast of Yemen got lit up in flames by the United States warplanes. They tore into Ras Isa port that traffickers and fighters had long shared. The Pentagon called it a strike against the Houthis. But behind the scenes, it was a fight against a far bigger target, a criminal empire on another continent. How did the blueprint for that war take shape here? And why was no one ready for it? Join us as we find out all about the United States' hit against cartels. At 4:15 in the morning, the calm over Yemen's Ras Isa port shattered. FA-18 Super Hornets swept in low, their precision missiles tearing into the docks and fuel facilities. To anyone watching from afar, it looked like another Middle East flare-up. But inside the Pentagon, the operation had nothing to do with halting Houthi strikes on shipping lanes. Yemen had quietly become a live-fire classroom for a different fight, one aimed at dismantling criminal empires. Every move was once a rehearsal for a war that hit the cartels. The Houthis had, without realizing it, built the perfect case study. They ran legitimate businesses alongside illicit ones, using the same port infrastructure to ship both oil and contraband. Their maritime routes ferried weapons, drugs, and black market goods across international waters. In many ways, they were running a mirror image of Mexico's cartels. The parallels didn't end with smuggling routes. Both groups were in the narcotics business. Houthi operations pulled in more than $1 billion a year from moving Pentagon, hashish, and heroin along the same networks used to transport rockets and rifles. One incident, the USS Ginsburg engagement, sealed the proof. When Houthi missiles came in by the dozen, the ship's captain threw out the manual. Instead of launching 2 interceptors per incoming target, he ordered single-shot kills. Every missile was taken down, and the ship kept enough firepower in reserve to survive another wave. The lesson stuck. The same approach later saved American ships during cartel-led counterattacks in Mexican waters. Drone warfare gave planners another test. Over 7 hours, FA-35 Lightning jets and FA-18 Hornets methodically shredded swarms of unmanned aircraft. AMRAAM missiles, guided by heat tracking systems, picked them off with pinpoint accuracy. Houthi air defenses, mostly outdated Soviet models, never got close. At 15,000 meters, American pilots owned the skies. Analysts picked apart every detail. The Houthis' anti-air tactics looked eerily similar to the defenses guarding Mexico's fentanyl labs deep in the mountains. Both forces relied on ex-military fighters, second-hand weapons, and disciplined defensive lines. Yemen's battlefields were teaching the Pentagon exactly how to break through the cartel's shielded strongholds in the Western Hemisphere. The intelligence breakthroughs were just as important. Signal intercept teams found that Houthi command structures operated almost identically to cartel hierarchies. Both kept operations compartmentalized, used encrypted channels, and ran logistics through layered networks. Cyber warfare units figured out how to crack these systems in the Red Sea, techniques they later used to eavesdrop on cartel command centers in Mexico. The Navy's interdiction game also changed. Red Sea patrols sharpened high-speed chases, cargo inspections, and boarding drills against smuggling vessels. Those same tactics later tore through the cartel's semi-submersible fleet, shuttling cocaine from Colombia to the United States West Coast. Perhaps the most valuable lesson came from the Ras Isa strike itself. It was a civilian-military hybrid target, part commercial port, part weapons hub. It had to be hit with precision, crippling the illicit side without destroying legitimate trade. That blueprint became the model for neutralizing cartel megalabs hidden inside legal industrial sites in Sinaloa's Sierra Madre Mountains. By the time the Pentagon closed the book on Yemen, the playbook was complete. Every tactic, every technology, every maneuver had been tested. The Houthis had been an unwitting sparring partner in a fight that was never truly about them. And south of the border, the cartels had no idea the war had already begun and that their defeat had already been mapped out. Pentagon strategists soon realized the operations in Yemen had done more than just cripple an Iranian-backed militia. They had produced an unexpected outcome, a ready-made plan for taking on a far more dangerous adversary. The question was whether naval tactics perfected against Houthi forces could be adapted to hunt criminal submarine fleets worth billions of dollars. That test came when the Coast Guard cutter James left port on a mission unlike any routine patrol. For 112 straight days, the crew stayed at sea, applying the lessons of the Red Sea to the waters of the Eastern Pacific. There were no port calls or breaks, only a sustained campaign against cartel-operated vessels. The impact was immediate. 48,000 pounds of narcotics, valued at over $900 million, were pulled from the ocean. In some cases, traffickers tossed their cargo into the waves in desperation to avoid capture. Even high-powered go-fast boats, capable of speeds of 80 miles per hour, found themselves unable to outrun helicopters flying pursuit patterns first developed to stop Houthi smugglers. From Yemen, United States forces had learned how to coordinate multiple assets to block and intercept fast-moving targets. Coast Guard cutters and Navy destroyers worked in concert, creating overlapping patrol zones. From destroyer decks, MH-60 Seahawk helicopters launched to intercept and disable fleeing boats, just as they had done in the Red Sea when cutting off arms shipments bound for Houthi fighters. The cartels, however, posed a challenge on another level. Their 80-foot narco submarines, costing up to $2 million each, were far from crude prototypes. Built with precision engineering, they could carry 10 tons of cocaine more than 2,500 miles, all while staying invisible to conventional radar. Many of the commanders piloting these subs were former naval officers. They understood American surveillance methods and countered them with lead-lined hulls to mask heat signatures, military-grade sonar for navigation, and GPS systems to plot courses through open ocean. Some subs could remain fully submerged for long stretches, making them almost impossible to track by standard patrol aircraft. Intelligence assessments revealed the scale of the problem. Cartel maritime operations ran much like formal navies. They maintained hidden coastal bases, followed predictable patrol rotations, and used encrypted communications similar to those of professional militaries. The Pacific had effectively become a contested battle space, with criminal organizations fielding capabilities that rivaled and sometimes surpassed smaller national fleets. This was where Yemen's lessons paid off. The Houthis had operated in much the same way, hiding among civilian shipping lanes while running military operations. Both groups relied on compartmentalized command systems, ex-military personnel, and intricate logistics chains stretching across international waters. The breakthrough came from signals intelligence. During Red Sea operations, American analysts had developed methods to infiltrate encrypted networks and map out command hierarchies. When applied in the Pacific, those same techniques exposed cartel communications, traced financial flows, and predicted smuggling schedules with remarkable accuracy. Special operations units also carried over tactics from the counter-Houthi campaign. Boarding teams fast-roped from helicopters onto moving vessels, conducted coordinated searches, and collected evidence according to procedures designed for counterterrorism missions. The only real change was the target. Ideology in Yemen had been replaced by the profit motive in Mexico. In the end, Yemen had been more than a fight against an insurgent force. It had been a proving ground for a new kind of maritime warfare, one that blurred the line between military conflict and law enforcement. The Pentagon came to see these as not two separate struggles, but different fronts in the same war against non-state actors at sea. And in that war, the United States had already built the playbook. The victories at sea had been important, but they were only a prelude to America's most decisive weapon. The question now is, can stealth technology slip undetected into the heart of Mexico and take out one of the most heavily guarded cartel assets in existence? The B-2 Spirit's record over Yemen gave Pentagon planners confidence. Flying at 50,000 feet with a radar signature smaller than a bird, it had destroyed hardened Houthi command bunkers without setting off a single alarm. Every strike, every destroyed target, and every missed defensive attempt had been recorded, studied, and fed into future mission plans. Those same capabilities were now aimed at a far deadlier threat. Hidden deep in the Sierra Madre Mountains of Sinaloa, a sprawling chemical facility as large as an aircraft hangar was producing enough fentanyl to kill 50 million people. This was not a makeshift drug lab. It was an industrial-scale operation supplied by bulk shipments of Chinese precursor chemicals and staffed by former military chemists. The plant ran around the clock, generating an estimated $2 billion a year while fueling overdose deaths from the Midwest to the West Coast. Its defenses reflected its value. The Sinaloa cartel had ringed the site with Russian-made anti-aircraft systems, underground bunkers, and a 200-strong security force made up mostly of ex-soldiers. Any conventional airstrike risked heavy losses. Mexican authorities, compromised by more than $100 million in annual bribes, were never going to touch it. Yemen had already shown what was possible. There, B-2s had flown straight through Russian-built air defense networks, including shoulder-fired SA-7s and ZSU gun platforms, without so much as a radar ping. The intelligence buildup for Mexico was even more detailed. From Fort Huachuca, surveillance teams ran an unbroken watch on cartel movements. MQ-9 Reaper drones armed with Hellfire missiles patrolled known smuggling corridors. Thermal imaging spotted human heat signatures from as far as 15 miles, allowing analysts to map guard rotations and shift changes. Above that, satellites tracked every vehicle approaching or leaving the compound. And the same signals intelligence teams that once mapped Houthi weapons depots now plotted each defensive position around the fentanyl plant. Electronic warfare units were assigned to black out cartel communications the moment the strike began. The B-2's advantages went far beyond radar invisibility. Its composite skin absorbed electromagnetic waves across several frequencies. Engines buried deep within the fuselage masked heat output, while internal cooling systems and specially designed exhaust diffusers cut infrared emissions by 80%. For the mission, planners selected the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker-busting weapon built to smash through 200 feet of reinforced concrete. The same bomb had once been used to take out hardened nuclear facilities. Now it was headed for a fentanyl lab. At 3:47 in the morning, 16 of them were released from an aircraft that no one on the ground could see or hear. Moments later, the mountains shuddered. Seismic sensors more than 200 miles away recorded the impact. Where the facility once stood, there was now only a smoking crater. No early warning, no counterfire, no survivors on the ground. Yemen had been the rehearsal. Mexico was the real battlefield. The laboratory strike was flawless, but destroying targets meant nothing without political cover to prevent international backlash. How do you bomb another country's territory without starting a war? Yemen had given Washington one of the hardest-earned lessons in modern conflict: how to dismantle a proxy force without setting off a wider war. The Houthis were backed and supplied by Iran, but American strikes were aimed only at their criminal rackets, steering clear of anything that could be traced directly to Tehran. That narrow focus removed the immediate danger, yet sidestepped a dangerous escalation. It was the same playbook the Pentagon would reach for when the fight moved closer to home, into Mexico, where the stakes were different but the sensitivities no less volatile. President Claudia Sheinbaum was caught in a dilemma that had echoes far beyond Latin America. Leaders in the Middle East had faced it too, balancing Washington's demands against powerful forces entrenched on their soil. Before the cameras, she promised cooperation but drew a line at outright foreign military control. The words called up a national scar, 1914, when United States Marines landed in Veracruz, and she made it clear that history would not be repeated under her watch. Inside government offices, the tone was far less public and far more urgent. The Mexican armed forces were already being forced into a quiet choice of allegiance, and according to United States intelligence, the Army, Sedena, could not be trusted to make the right one. The record spoke for itself. General Salvador Cienfuegos, once the nation's top defense official, had shielded the H2 cartel while in uniform. Genaro Garcia Luna, the former security chief, was serving nearly 4 decades in an American prison for taking cartel bribes. Files from the DEA went even further, suggesting cartel money may have seeped into Andrés Manuel López Obrador's 2006 presidential run. This wasn't low-level corruption, it reached the top floors of government. For United States planners, that meant one thing: any operational detail shared with SEDENA was as good as leaked to cartel command in real time. That left only the Navy, CMAR, as a viable partner. When Ambassador Ron Johnson arrived in Mexico City, it wasn't by accident. A former Green Beret and CIA hand, he knew how to operate in shadows as well as across a negotiating table. His mission, signed off by the National Security Council, was to secure an agreement for joint action that would never see the light of day. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered the message directly and without varnish. The same words he had once spoken in Middle Eastern capitals were repeated here. Help us carry out precision strikes on the highest value targets, or the United States will move alone. Mexico could have its airspace coordination and a seat in intelligence sharing, keeping its sovereignty intact on paper, or it could watch American units operate without a nod to local command. What came out of those talks was unlike anything North America had seen. Away from microphones, Sheinbaum gave the go-ahead for controlled foreign operations inside Mexican territory. CMAR would feed targeting information, manage flight corridors, and hold operational security tight, while American special operators hit cartel leadership that Mexican law enforcement would never be able to touch. The logic was proven. Yemen had shown that precise, intelligence-led strikes could break an enemy's back without taking and holding land, without installing new regimes, without whipping up a nationalist backlash. Now, the same approach that had crippled Iranian-backed militants would be turned against Mexico's most dangerous cartels, preserving the country's flag and borders through quiet cooperation, instead of watching them dissolve in open war. With diplomatic cover secured and stealth bombers proven effective, Pentagon planners activated a strategy that would make Yemen look like a training exercise. But would total warfare doctrine work against enemies motivated by profit instead of ideology? President Trump's March 4th declaration to Congress built directly on Yemen's tactical successes. 8 major drug cartels received the same terrorist organization designation previously applied to Houthi militants. This wasn't symbolic bureaucracy. The classification authorized CIA assassination operations and allowed military forces to operate under rules of engagement developed during Middle Eastern counterterrorism campaigns. The Pentagon's 4-phase strategy mirrored operations that had eliminated Iranian proxy networks across multiple countries. Phase 1 targeted external support systems that kept criminal organizations operational. Chinese chemical suppliers and financial networks would be disrupted using the same methods that had severed Iranian weapon shipments to Houthi forces. Economic warfare specialists applied sanctions and cyber attacks that had proven effective against state sponsors of terrorism. Phase 2 involved precision elimination of leadership structures and critical infrastructure. B-2 stealth bombers and special operations teams would use targeting procedures perfected during Red Sea operations. The same intelligence networks that had mapped Houthi command bunkers were now identifying every cartel facility across Mexico. Signal intercepted revealed that criminal organizations used identical communication protocols and hierarchical structures as Middle Eastern militant groups. Cartel leaders presented a fundamentally different challenge than ideological terrorists, though. Houthi commanders were willing to die for their cause and often sought martyrdom during combat operations. Mexican drug traffickers were businessmen motivated entirely by profit margins and personal survival. When revenues disappeared and commanders faced elimination rather than imprisonment, they would negotiate surrender rather than fight to the death. Phase 3 took advantage of a key psychological gap. Recent truces between competing cartel groups showed that, when enough pressure was applied, even large criminal networks could be persuaded to abandon specific activities. A clear example was the agreement between the Grupo Escorpión and the Metros cartel, which temporarily stopped fentanyl shipments into South Texas. It proved that economic incentives could change cartel behavior faster than military force ever could. Intelligence analysts had mapped every aspect of cartel operations across 3 countries using surveillance techniques developed during the Houthi elimination campaigns. Financial networks, communication systems, and logistical supply chains were completely exposed. Naval forces controlled ocean trafficking routes using interdiction methods perfected in Red Sea patrols. Stealth aircraft had already shown they were capable of hitting targets anywhere in Mexico without setting off defensive systems. With that capability established, Phase 4 turned to rebuilding efforts and putting measures in place to prevent the kind of power vacuums that had caused long-term instability in past Middle Eastern campaigns. Working with trustworthy elements of Mexican security forces, American advisors would help establish legitimate authority in areas previously controlled by criminal organizations. This approach avoided the nation-building mistakes that had complicated Iraq and Afghanistan interventions. The laboratory strike had been more than a tactical success. It represented the first application of total warfare doctrine against transnational criminal organizations. Operations in Yemen had laid down the legal basis, tactical methods, and diplomatic examples for carrying out long-term military action against non-state groups inside the borders of allied nations. For military planners, the situations in Yemen and Mexico were not viewed as separate wars, but rather as interconnected parts of a broader conflict. Both campaigns targeted the same type of hybrid threat: criminal organizations with military capabilities that operated across international boundaries. The Pentagon had developed a unified doctrine for eliminating these groups regardless of their political motivation or geographic location. American forces had spent 18 months perfecting every aspect of anti-cartel warfare during operations against Iranian-backed militants. The testing phase was complete. Mexico's criminal organizations were facing a military machine that had already proven it could eliminate any non-state actor anywhere in the world. Yemen wasn't just another Middle Eastern conflict. It had been America's declaration of total war against organized crime itself. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.